You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 6th of December 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up.
The mandate that you democratically entrusted to me is a 5-year mandate, and I will exercise it fully until its term.
Misunderstood, staying put and not responsible for his government's collapse. President Emmanuel Macron tells the French that it's their politicians who've chosen chaos by bringing down Parliament. We'll ask whether such a confident approach will wash. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes, the latest on the aftermath of Tuesday's 6 hours of martial law in South Korea. Will there be enough votes to impeach the president? We'll ask the organiser of this week's international luxury travel market how she creates one of the most prestigious hospitality and tourism events on earth. Andrew Mueller will tell us what we learned. And if your country were a piece of music, what would it sound like?
The idea is that you can have it infinitely on a loop. And so there's no starting point and there's no ending point, just like nature.
We'll hear from the great-grandson of the composer Sibelius, who's created a modern soundscape for his country, Finland. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in today's news. The US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has cancelled a trip to South Korea following President Yoon Suk-yeol's attempt this week to impose martial law. Taiwan's president has urged China to unclench its fists ahead of a series of fresh military drills that China is expected to conduct around Taiwanese waters. And Iraq's foreign minister will meet his Syrian and Iranian counterparts to discuss the situation in Syria later today. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, wanted a new Prime Minister as well as a new government for France. Yesterday, Michel Barnier handed in his resignation, having achieved the double record of being both France's oldest and shortest-lived Prime Minister in modern history. It follows Wednesday's vote of no confidence, where both the left and the right joined forces in opposition to his budget. So one would assume that the President Emmanuel Macron would be touched by humility in last night's speech that he delivered to the French people. In fact, it seemed to be completely the opposite. And to tell us now, I'm joined from Paris by Florence Biedermann, journalist and political analyst, and also by Simon Bouvier, who's Monocle's Paris bureau chief. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, Emma.
Simon, let's begin with you. What was your initial reaction when Emmanuel Macron started speaking?
Well, Emma, my first reaction was that I wasn't sure why he decided to come on television to speak, because his speech only lasted for 10 minutes, and it seemed at first glance that he didn't announce much. But in the end, we did learn three things. We learned that he is not going to resign, which is one of the demands of the far left, and that has been something that has been making the rounds in the political sphere, is that the only way to unlock this situation for him to resign, etc. He ruled that out. The second thing is that he also buried the budget. There were kind of rumblings that naming a new prime minister very quickly might allow them to resurrect some version of the budget that caused the downfall of the Barnier government. He ruled that out, saying that instead there would be some special law to ensure the government continues to function, but that essentially that particular budget is dead. And then also it was a bit unrealistic to expect a new name, but he also said that he would not be naming a prime minister immediately and that he would be naming it in the coming days. So Barnier will still be the caretaker prime minister for a few days.
Let's have
how many.
We don't know yet. He was asked to stay on for a bit longer. Let's have a little listen to a couple of just a moment of what a touch of what Emmanuel Macron spoke about last night.
I will never take the blame for the lack of responsibility of others, and notably lawmakers who choose knowingly to bring down the budget and the government of France a few days before Christmas. That's why I'll name a prime minister in the coming days. I will ask them to form a government in the general interest, representing all the political parties who can participate in it or who agree not to bring it down.
Florence, there was a real sense there that when Emmanuel Macron started to speak last night, there was one thing that he really needed to get across, was that none of this was his fault.
Well, Jupiter stays Jupiter, you know. He vaguely hinted that, yes, okay, the snap election he convoked and the dissolution of the assembly was his decision and was misunderstood by the French people. But this is so Macron, you know, like when there is something wrong, actually, it's maybe because people don't understand his logic and his intelligence. Somehow, you know, that's how it sounds. But let's say this time, at least, he said he takes the responsibility. So what did he mean, takes the responsibility of what? Like of the consequences. So somehow, you know, he is showing that he knows that there was something that didn't work, but that's as far as he will ever go, you know, to say he was wrong.
And indeed, Simon, he blamed the politicians for bringing down the government just before Christmas, disrespecting the electorate and choosing disorder. However, as Florence has just said, you know, calling a snap election in June was something which surprised everybody and which created an utterly unworkable government because no one could agree.
Absolutely. I also agree with Florence that this is as close to an apology for doing that we're ever going to get. But I think, yeah, the situation is truly very complicated to navigate because the way I see it, unless the terms of the equations change and they manage to convince the more moderate left-leaning parties to a deal, which they have not been willing to do so far, staying united in their refusal to do anything other than lead a government. I think it's going to be the same thing all over again, whoever the next prime minister is. So it was his decision to call these early elections that created this political dynamic in a country that we shouldn't forget doesn't have the political culture of compromise that other countries that are more used to having to deal with fragmented parliaments and having to kind of to tone down their expectations to the lowest common denominator that they can agree on with opposition parties. You know, that's not part of how we do things here in France. It's my way or the highway, and I think that's a problem. And
just explain to us, Florence, why Michel Barnier's budget failed so badly, and why indeed Michel Barnier failed. Perhaps because he didn't represent any of the loudest voices in the French Parliament.
Yeah, I would say from the start he had kind of a mission impossible, you know, because the parliament now is fragmented within in three blocks that have more or less the same size, like the left, the right, and the center. So it was difficult anyway. But what he probably underestimated is the fact that Marine Le Pen, the leader of the far right, in any case, would be ready to make this vote of no confidence so quickly. I think he thought he could, you know, discuss with her, which he tried to do, manage a little bit and then have his budget passed. But it was kind of a surprise somehow, you know, that Marine Le Pen would so quickly decide to oust the government. So now the positions are clear, like on the far left of Jean-Luc Mélenchon and on the far right of Marine Le Pen, they both want Macron to go. So yeah, as Simon said, like the next government, whoever is in charge, may be threatened by exactly the same process. So now Macron is trying to form kind of an alliance between his centrist party plus the moderate left, the Socialist Party, and the moderate right, like the Republican Party of Barnier. Whether such an alliance can exist and whether it can last more than a few months, this is really the question now.
And now, Simon, the hunt is on for a new prime minister. I mean, there were all manner of different messages coming out from Paris yesterday. At one point, it was Barnier will stay as a caretaker government, caretaker prime minister, which seems to be what's actually happening. Then there was a suggestion that Macron last night would name a new prime minister, and then there's a confirmation that there'll be a new prime minister in the coming days. One commentator likened the hunt for a new prime minister in France to the amazing phrase "mouton à cinq pattes," a five-legged sheep. It's an almost impossible task, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, I think it's true that it is an impossible task to pick a prime minister who's going to, swoop in and just fix everything, persuade all of these parties that are at each other's throats to get along and that'll be able to govern smoothly. That is impossible. What I think is not entirely impossible is to find a solution for the government to do the bare minimum and actually run for a while. And in that respect, I wonder whether Marine Le Pen's decision to censure the Barnier government when, in fact, as Florence was hinting at earlier, she was in a position of strength. She and her party were in a position of strength, and they were getting their policy priorities integrated into this budget. She was able to get a lot of concessions from Barnier, and then she decided to throw it all out the window anyway when it was time to capitalize and to, if not vocally support, at least back this budget. So now whoever comes next is going to think twice about tying their political destiny to the Rassemblement National. So maybe they will have to work hard to try to convince the moderate leftists to ally with the central bloc instead of the far right, but they're definitely going to do everything that they can and compromise more on their policy priorities in order to avoid tying their political destiny to Le Pen.
Florence, Macron said that he's going nowhere until 2027. He's going to fulfill his mandate. And he talked about this 30 months that France has to act, to innovate, to produce, to educate and to protect, bringing in the French nation as responsible for rebuilding a nation, perhaps a concession that France is not in, is not in a good state. I mean, in these next 30 months, how are the French going to take this? And more importantly, how is this going to ripple across the rest of Europe?
Well, already you can find the effect, the fact that France became such a politically unstable country is really making people nervous in finance, in politics, in economy. Right now, for example, Ursula von der Leyen is going to sign an agreement for this commercial agreement, Mercosur, for free trade with 5 countries in South America. This deal is opposed by France because it would put its own agriculture and farmers in danger somehow. So whatever France says, it will be happening, which maybe you could have thought, yes, it would have happened anyway. But the situation of kind of weakness in which Macron is internally, politically, is also reflected internationally. Even if he invited Donald Trump to come for the reopening of Notre Dame, which is kind of a diplomatic stunt. But I mean, yes, there are effects already. And yes, the question is how, not maybe what's going to happen in those 30 months, but what's going to happen until next June, because next June there will be again the possibility of snap elections, and with a parliament that, if the parliament cannot function, if again there are no confidence votes, then it seems very probable that there would be again snap election in next June. So this is one of the scenario, but obviously it's not really clear to anyone what will happen.
Finally, Simon, I mean, what is Monocle's take on this? I mean, how are we looking at it for the next coming days?
Well, I think there's the kind of political side to it. So which way will they decide to go? Will they decide to try a similar approach, to choose a Rassemblement National compatible prime minister from among their own ranks, and try the same kind of solution, but try to attack it differently from a tactical standpoint? Or again, will they pivot to a more kind of left-leaning option to try and get a more stable outcome than the past 3 months. So that's the political side of things. And I think on the other end, I think we'll be focusing on the contrast between the image that France projects with the Olympic Games, with the reopening of Notre Dame, with all of the soft power that these huge French brands and success stories are projecting abroad, and the political instability. Can the two coexist? Is it just the province of political junkies to focus on the instability here, or is it going to take proportions that start affecting the image of France abroad as well?
Simon Bouvier, thank you so much. And thanks also to Florence Biedermann. You're listening to Monocle Radio. This is The Globalist. 16:15 in Seoul, 7:15 a.m. here in London. Now, a motion to impeach South Korea's president could be put to Parliament this weekend, following Tuesday's failed attempt to introduce martial law to the country. There have been more protests in the capital of Seoul, with demonstrators demanding Yoon Suk-yeol step down. Well, in order, however, for the impeachment to pass, several members of President Yoon's own party must vote against him. To find out the likelihood of that, I'm joined now by the journalist William Yang, who currently is in Seoul. A very good afternoon to you, William.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you. Now, just explain to us, what is the likelihood of President Yoon's own party throwing him to the lions?
So that likelihood has increased by a lot since this morning, after the chairperson of the ruling People Power Party came out and said that he has serious concerns about what the president did, which is that he tried to arrest a number of high-ranking politicians, especially those in the main opposition Democratic Party. And he feels like that for someone to do that before he announced the martial law is a very dangerous sign for the rest of the South Korean people. And he feels like Yoon is no longer suited to be the president and to lead the country.
And there is now also a police investigation launched into President Yoon. There is a possibility that he could be charged with insurrection.
Right, exactly. I was, in fact, just right now outside the National Assembly, which just had a very dramatic development, actually. I was in the parliament a couple hours ago having conversations with opposition MPs, and they all agree that he should immediately be impeached and then face the process and then be imprisoned. But at the same time, there is a little bit of a division within his party as of now. Not everyone has come on board with the idea that they should throw all their weight behind the idea of impeaching him, because there are some concerns about the potential political blowback for the ruling party itself. But right outside, originally, President Yoon was trying to come to the National Assembly to meet MPs from his party, but he faced oppositions coming from the opposition MPs. And so he turned around and in the end did not come to the National Assembly. And right now there are growing numbers of protesters now chanting angrily for him to step down. And so we are really seeing pressures mounting on him from all sides. And it's very likely that the next 24 hours will be very critical for South Korea.
Indeed, because those in charge now have to make that very difficult decision about what to put first. Party first, loyalty, political stability first, or indeed the wider principles of what is best for South Korea.
Right, exactly. I think the ruling party is really caught in a very difficult situation. They first invited Yoon into the party before the election in 2022, and his image as a very popular prosecutor somehow was able to fit into the urge for a political change inside South Korea at that time. So they somehow managed to return to power. But immediately after that, there are growing signs that he is, in fact, a leader who is very obsessed with his own opinion and does not really accept other second opinions. So that is what has been playing out. And in fact, a lot of the opposition MPs say that that personal characteristic is exactly why we saw him announcing this very surprising and confusing martial law on Tuesday night, even catching a lot of his cabinet members off guard. And in the end, he faced the consequences. And now the ruling party faces a dilemma of whether to just throw him under the bus and follow the public opinion, which is exactly calling him to resign. It's not even being impeached at this point.
You mentioned the fact that we've had protests and that there's an angry amount of public opinion on this. But how have South Korean citizens absorbed the last 3 or 4 days? Because there's been a sort of a fundamental challenge to the democratic principles which South Korea has embraced so successfully in the last few decades.
Right, exactly. I think South Korea is not a stranger to impeachment of presidents. Back in 2017, former President Park Kyung-hoi was also eventually impeached by the parliament. But what is different this time is a leader who seems very, very stubborn and obsessed with his clinging onto power and is refusing to even come out and engage with the public. He has not yet come out and engaged with the opposition to come out to he has been postponing his press conferences. And I think what we're seeing here is that South Korean people knowing that they just have to throw all their weight together, unite their powers, and show President Yoon himself that no matter how long he tries to hold on to power, they will be staying out here. It's freezing every day here in South Korea, but we are only seeing the number of people growing as he drags on this drama.
William Yang, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. Still to come.
We learned this week that enthusiasts of the shortly-to-be reinstalled failed putschist President-elect Donald Trump were aghast at the news that the incumbent President Joe Biden had resolved to use the powers attendant upon his office to pardon his idiot son Hunter for a picturesque variety of malfeasances upon which he was awaiting sentence.
That'll be Andrew Mueller. Coming up soon, we'll have what we learned. But stay with us on The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
We continue today's programme now with a look at the newspapers, and joining me from our Zurich studio in Dufourstrasse 90 is Noelle Salmi, travel, culture and sustainability writer. A very good morning to you, Noelle. How's Zurich looking this morning?
Good morning, Emma. Zurich is looking great. And what is really looking remarkable is the cafe here is still chic and cozy. And tomorrow it's going to be transformed into the Monocle Christmas market.
I've heard all about the prospect of it all moving inside. Just checking the weather forecast, it looks like it's going to be pouring. So there's a good idea's been made to bring everything inside.
Exactly. It's going to be really cozy with raclette and lots of wonderful goodies from 10 to 7 tomorrow and Sunday. I can't wait.
Do we have any indication about who's going to be exhibiting and who's going to be sort of coming? Because it's always a lovely sort of, it has a cozy, sort of almost a sort of like a local feel to it though, but with that very international touch that Zurich does so well.
That's exactly right. Well, I think that the list is top secret for now, but you can count for sure on a good mix of international and some wonderful local designers. I always find some real gems here.
I bet you there's cashmere. Right. Okay. While we anticipate and dig out our wallets ready for a little trip to D90 tomorrow morning, tell us what's happening in the papers.
So after you check out the wonderful Christmas market here, you might want to explore lovely Zurich. And in a historic part of Zurich, in the Niederdorf neighborhood of Old Town, there are a couple of buildings that have some words on them that have been deemed racist. And it's been a long-running battle between the Zurich City Council and the organizations for the preservation of the historical buildings from Zurich City and from the canton to cover up or remove that wording. And the Zurich City Council won a victory yesterday. These two buildings have the words zum Modernkopf and zum Modertanz in old-fashioned Swiss lettering above the doors. The words mean "to the Moor's head" and "to the Moor's dance," and that's considered pejorative. I checked in with Desiree Bandley, our native Swiss producer here in the studio, and she confirmed that really it is offensive language. And so yesterday, an appeals court agreed to throw out an earlier court decision that said that the words should stand as significance, the witnesses to architectural history. And that court said, no, they can be covered up in a way that's reversible to preserve the original value and integrity of these very old buildings. I mean, the words themselves harken back to the 1600s and the 1400s.
How much is there a debate about this, given the fact that, as you say, there needs to be some sort of recognition of the cultural significance, not necessarily the good significance of having such words above doors, but at the same time there is a need to effectively show a much more modern side of Switzerland.
Well, that's right. And that's exactly what debate was about. An earlier ruling back in April of 2023 said, that no one really cared. There's no public interest. And so we might as well keep it on there because it's part of architectural history. And the Zurich City Council said, no, people do care and it is offensive. And it's time to respect what people are thinking today and to modernize that kind of thing.
Let's move on to a story coming out of New York City. The shooting of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, the biggest health insurance provider. There's been a very strange reaction to this, hasn't there? Because instead of the sympathy and the grief that should be shared with those who've lost Mr. Thompson, there has been a large spotlight on the culture of US health insurance providers.
Well, that's exactly right. And in fact, it was my very first reaction when I heard that he was shot. I've experienced U.S. health insurance myself in the case of my mother, who lives there, 85-year-old woman being sent home immediately after surgery, right after waking up. It's really crazy. And she has a good health insurance provider. United Healthcare has a really bad reputation. In fact, the New York Times reported that its denial rates ranged from 7% to 27% denying coverage. And so online, there has been a spate of morbid glee. One of my favorites is thoughts and deductibles to the family. Unfortunately, my condolences are out of network. I don't know if out of network is the same thing outside of the United States, but it means that the doctor is not covered by that insurance policy. In fact, it seems really to have been the motivation itself based on casings from the bullets that policeman found on the scene. The casing said, "Deny, defend, and depose," which is the title of a book written by a professor, Jay Feynman, in 2010, Delay, Deny, Defend, Why Insurance Companies Don't Pay Claims and What You Can Do About It. He said, this author, that their refusal to pay claims was part of an increasing and systematic focus on maximizing profits. So people online, there are stories from an ER nurse saying, I can't have sympathy for him because what I've seen of patients and families suffering. And somebody else said, well, the ambulance ride to the hospital won't be covered. Another person said, this needs to be the new norm, eat the rich. And in fact, a Columbia management professor, Columbia Business School, said, executives, particularly from health insurance companies, should worry if this is the new norm. They might want to ask themselves, am I next?
Let's turn now to an article in El País about the Argentinian president Javier Milei becoming a symbol for the global far right.
Well, it seems that crazy-haired populists, really, they all seem to belong at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, which this week was held in Buenos Aires. It was opened by an American couple who said that the purpose of holding it in Buenos Aires was to fight communism, defeat communism in Latin America and the whole world. And Javier Milei has picked up those words. He said we must finish off the rubbish of socialism. He called the election of Donald Trump a historic opportunity to change the world. He talked about a cultural battle and the need for the far right to coordinate internationally so the leftists don't enter from any side. And he went ahead and picked on some of his favorite leftists in Latin America, Lula in Brazil, Colombia's Gustavo Petro, right next door in Uruguay, José Pepe Mujica, and he lumped them all together with Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela and Cuba's Raúl Castro.
Noel, finally, we have just a moment to touch on the fact, you're talking to the owner of a 1999 Technics cassette player, which still is in fine working order, and apparently it is prized. Well, not just that one, but equipment of that era is suddenly becoming wildly fashionable again.
So, Emma, as an old music lover, I knew that you would love this story. And I wondered if you actually own some of this stuff. And now you know how valuable it is. That's right. So the BBC was reporting that when Oasis, the tour was announced, the last shop in the UK that sells music on cassette tapes sold out of everything Oasis. Also popular are cassettes from the 80s of Kate Bush. And it seems that the majority of customers who want this old music equipment are under 30. There's also teenagers who come in with their parents. And it's really part of a wider trend of people buying and fixing old music equipment. Part of it is nostalgia. Part of it is quality. And perhaps the idea that new stuff just doesn't have the same character.
Noel Salmi, thank you so much, and we very much look forward to coverage from the Monocle Christmas Market in Dufourstrasse 90 over the weekend. You're listening to Monocle Radio. It's The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson, and the time here in London is 7:30 a.m. Let's have a look at some of today's other headlines. The US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has cancelled a trip to South Korea following President Yoon Suk-yeol's attempt this week to impose martial law. Planning had been underway for a trip, but it was determined that now was not an appropriate time. Taiwan's president has urged China to unclench its fists. President Lai Ching-te was talking ahead of a series of fresh military drills that China is expected to conduct around Taiwanese waters. The fresh round of exercises are understood to be in response to President Lai's trip to the Pacific, which included stopovers on US soil. And Iraq's foreign minister will meet his Syrian and Iranian counterparts today to discuss the situation in Syria. The meeting comes after an advance by Syrian rebels capturing the main northern city of Aleppo from the Iran-backed Syrian president Bashar al-Assad. And those are the headlines on The Globalist. Now, earlier this week, Monocle Radio decamped to the French Riviera, to the international luxury travel market in Cannes. It's the annual get-together of the creme de la creme of world hospitality and travel. Well, the organisation of the event is done by Alison Gilmore. She's been in charge of the ILTM for 12 years and oversees everything from the choice who gets to exhibit to where she places them within the halls. Well, we met at the Monocle stand, and I began by asking Alison how she goes about bringing the event together.
We've got all the exhibitors, all the partners that are here. Obviously, they're the people that pay to come and build these very fabulous booths that they build. We have everybody here that needs to be here in luxury travel, and you can see from the show floor, we are pretty rammed. So on the show floor, how it works is a lot of people have been in the same location for quite a number of years. The easiest way to explain it is like a jigsaw without the lid. Okay, you've got to put people in places, but you're not quite sure. Everybody wants more space, so it is a bit of a juggling act. What we have done this year, and I'm sure you've seen it, we've moved a core outside to the beach. They have built the most fabulous pavilion. They have a little ILTM within an ILTM. That freed up some space for us inside, so we were able to move a few people around. And that's what, if you look at the floor plan, we try and we've got a global village upstairs where all the big brands are. You've got your Mandarins and Roccofortes, those people. And then down here on the level one, we've got the more funky brands, we've got all the tourism boards. So we divide the show up like that. So it is quite complicated. I've been doing it a long time, so I do find it easy, but I do control the floor plan. Nobody just gets put somewhere unless I've gone, they fit there, that works.
And since 2012, when you took it over, this is clearly exploded, it has bloomed. How have you managed to curate its journey, to make sure that it still retains its element of luxury, yet at the same time absolutely embraces the fact that global luxury travel is an enormous business now?
It is. It absolutely is. And over the last, so I've said this is my 13th edition, it's evolving it, and it is keeping it fresh every year and moving things around, so you don't walk in and go, oh, there again, oh, look there, and it looks the same. I try and change, even if it's just changing the colour of the carpet. It is about keeping it evolving, and the industry has gone from strength to strength. From 13 years ago to now, we're in a completely different world.
In what way has it changed?
It's changed. It's just gone from strength to strength. There's so many more brands come into play now, and luxury was always very niche. For me, this is not niche anymore. This is, luxury travel is a big part of what travel is now.
Is that a good idea? Because the idea of luxury is, a key part of luxury is rarity.
It is.
And the fact that we are in a world where we are competing for cash-rich but time-poor people who only have a certain amount of time that they can allocate to themselves. They're super busy. And you also have the idea of enormous companies now exploding into the luxury market. And is there an argument to say that actually luxury cannot be too big because it has to have an element of exclusivity and rarity to it?
Well, I think the exclusivity and rarity comes from each of the brands in what they have. And at the end of the day, it is customer choice. The people that want to stay in these places will go and stay in them. Whether there's 500 Rosewoods or 5 Rosewoods, if they like that Rosewood brand, that is where they're going to stay. And I think, I think we're there. I think it is exploding in lots of brands, but I think we're getting to sort of the pinnacle of what luxury travel is. And for me, I don't want this show to get much bigger, because then I think it loses what it's actually about.
And the fact also is that the resources for luxury are getting more and more pinched, not least for talent.
Yeah.
The people we've had coming through this booth for the last couple of days have all openly said that they go and poach their enemies' staff unashamedly all the time, whether it's by slipping a little bit of paper over the reception desk or posting a QR code outside their window. There is that feel that people are competing more and more for the people who and the skills and the locations that actually there is only a limited amount of.
Oh, absolutely. I'd say ILTM is probably one of the biggest recruitment shows in the world. If you want a job, come to RTM. Everyone's there. But no, you're absolutely right. And I know of hotels that have built some fabulous hotels, but they've had to close a few floors because they don't have the staff to service them. And it is an issue. It absolutely is. And it's been an issue for a number of years. Pre-COVID, it probably wasn't as much as an issue as it is post-COVID. And I don't know where everyone's gone post-COVID. Everyone can't still be being a yoga teacher, can they? Because that's what they all did over COVID.
How do you, though, encourage a world of work where hospitality actually becomes something that people want to be when they grow up, and that they don't want to just be general manager, that they want to be that person who delivers the amazing service in the restaurant, who can fix everything behind reception?
I think that's a certain kind of person, and they're definitely out there. And maybe, in some of the colleges and universities, there needs to be some better, hospitality courses that make it a sexy industry, because it is a sexy industry. Once you're in it, you never leave. It gets in your blood. Like I said, I've been in it nearly 30 years, and I can't leave. We need to get that out there to the next generation coming through. There is plenty of work, but you just need to have the right attitude, because once you're in it, you ain't going anywhere.
Who have you spoken to around here who do you think does this well and sort of creates a place and actually a sort of a genuinely attractive career path inside hospitality?
I think lots of them do, and people like Ritz-Carlton, everyone is ladies and gentlemen. These are the ladies and gentlemen of Ritz-Carlton, and they have a really good vibe. I walked upstairs to where Ritz-Carlton are before, and every morning, and they're not the only one, there's quite a few, they have their morning, they all get together, they have their briefing, and they're all getting ready for the day. A lot of them do that. Hyatt's another one. You know, they look after their staff. So I went to a recent hotel of Hyatt's that was opening. They have a whole village underneath to look after their staff. They have a really good training program. Before they open a hotel, they bring everyone in. They all get their uniforms. There's lots of them doing it. I don't think people know how many people do actually do really good programs, but they have to go out and find the talent. And another good example, we have an event in the Bahamas. And there's 3 hotels. It's Rosewood, it's Hyatt, and it's SLS. Underneath that resort, I've walked it. It's like Highway 1. It goes for miles. They have something like 7,000 staff. And the staff love working there because they've created the right culture.
And that was Alison Gilmore there from the ILTM talking to me at the event in Cannes a little earlier this week. You're listening to Monocle Radio. Now, it's Friday, and that can only mean that it's time for What We Learned. Here's Andrew Mueller.
We learned this week how not to stage a coup d'etat, not that we imagine many of our listeners were contemplating such a step. First, we learned from South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol interrupting regular television programming at around 11 o'clock of a Tuesday evening that his nation was beset by North Korean fifth columnists and that there was therefore no choice but to take the grave step to suspend democracy until further notice.
I declare martial law to protect the Free Republic of Korea from the threat of North Korean communist forces, to eradicate the despicable pro-North Korean anti-state forces that are plundering the freedom and happiness of our people.
Righto. We learned then that members of South Korea's parliament begged to differ with the president's analysis of the national predicament and began reporting, despite the lateness of the hour, to the parliament building, by then besieged by bewildered soldiers, even if some MPs had to be hoisted over the fence by sympathetic demonstrators. We learned that of the quorum of 190 MPs who voted on the propriety of the president's manoeuvre, opinion could not be said to be narrowly split. All 190 of them vouchsafed that they weren't having it.
190인 중 찬성 190인으로서 비상계엄 해제 요구 결의안은 가결되었음을 선포합니다.
We then learned, or at least surmised, that President Yoon had neglected to attend to a few of the fundamentals of coup staging, i.e. make sure of your military support, your political cover and the fear of your people, for we swiftly learned that President Yoon had none of these going for him. The soldiers went home, his own party sent a please explain note, and a hefty chunk of the population of Seoul stayed out all night, chanting things which we, for one humorous news review, doubt translate from the Korean as, "Yay for President Yoon, this is a great idea, it's all going brilliantly." We then learned that President Yoon had determined, upon mature reflection, what with one thing and another, taking the broader view and so forth, that 6 hours or so was about long enough for South Korea to squirm beneath the authoritarian jackboot. We learned, in short, that President Yoon had decided to call the whole thing off.
바로 국무회의를 통해 국회의 요구를 수용하여 계엄을 해제할 것입니다.
The unmistakable awkwardness of tone there of that bloke in the pub who has just swaggered up to someone he thinks he can intimidate, sneeringly demanded to take matters into the car park, and received the response, "Just let me finish my drink and say goodbye to my fellow members of the SAS karate squad, and I'll be right with you." We have not, as of this broadcast, learned of an altogether satisfactory answer to what feels like the key question, i.e. what the hell was all that about, but we did learn from the alacrity with which South Korean lawmakers tabled articles of impeachment against President as of this recording Yoon that it is apparently perfectly possible for the people's representatives to organise themselves to take decisive action against an errant head of state who has demonstrably lost the run of himself and attempted to overturn the constitutional order on the basis of unevidenced fantasy.
No, really? Oh, that blows my mind.
Really? No way. Blow me down.
Seriously, all jokes aside.
When are the jokes?
Shut up. We learned that both a decent-sized cohort at least of South Korean MPs take democracy seriously enough to defend it. Let's have a round of applause. And that South Korea's citizens are not to be trifled with either. Indeed, if there is one thing we can/should learn from this, it is: don't screw with people whose reaction to existential national peril is to mount a flatbed truck in an inflatable orange suit affixed with the president's face and improvise a musical. At least we think that's what is going on here. Because, by way of contrast,
and the rockets red glare.
In the United States, we learned that enthusiasts of the shortly-to-be reinstalled failed putschist President-elect Donald Trump were aghast, just like that, at the news that the incumbent, President Joe Biden, had resolved to use the powers attendant upon his office to pardon his idiot son Hunter for a picturesque variety of malfeasances upon which he was awaiting sentence.
Whether Biden actually knew what his son was up to. That really bothers me because the two of them were obviously in conversation when Hunter was practicing all these international deals. It's just so wrong, and nobody's going to ever hold Biden accountable for that.
We learned, therefore, that MAGA world thinks it's just awful.
Awful.
Awful. Awful.
Awful.
Awful.
Awful.
Exactly. When a US president indulges in arrant nepotism, especially when it means letting members of the family off the hook for crimes of which they have been duly convicted in a court of law, and or placing such a disreputable figure in a position in which they will be in some or other capacity representing the United States overseas. And it's a pretty safe bet that the General Muttered Agreement crew are in concurrence on this one.
I think so.
Because, by hilarious coincidence, we learned of President-elect Trump's pick to serve as US ambassador to France.
Trump also wants real estate developer Charles Kushner to be ambassador to France. Kushner is the father of Trump's son-in-law, Jared. Trump pardoned this elder Kushner in 2020. Years earlier, Charles Kushner was sentenced to 2 years in prison after pleading guilty to tax evasion, making illegal campaign donations, and also witness tampering. In a scheme of revenge, prosecutors say he hired a prostitute to lure his brother-in-law, then had their encounter recorded with a secret camera and had it sent to his wife. Chris Christie, who was U.S. attorney at that time, called it one of the most loathsome and disgusting crimes he had prosecuted.
The first two people to hold that post for fans of American declinism were Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. We learned, as ever and as always, it's fine when my mob does it, bad when the other crowd does.
Awful.
Awful. Awful.
Awful.
For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Moore.
Awful.
Awful.
Thank you, Andrew, and a brand new episode airs at the same time next week, right here on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Finally, it's time for a rather meaty Nordic news roundup. Petri Burtsoff, Monocle's Helsinki correspondent, joins me now. Very good morning to you, Petri. Where are you and how's it looking?
Good morning, Emma. I'm in Helsinki, the capital, looking out the window. There's lots of snow. It's beautiful wintry landscapes or cityscapes. It's about -1 degrees, and there's a lot of Finnish flags flying around, which is not something you typically see in Helsinki. But now almost every house, every apartment building has a flag out.
And why is that?
That's because Finland is celebrating its 107th Independence Day today, which is a day off for us Finns, and one of the biggest celebrations of the year. There's going to be celebrations and dinners taking place at every Finnish household. There's a presidential ball taking place, which will be broadcast on live TV. This is one of the most watched TV shows in Finland by far, actually. And so, yeah, we will be celebrating today.
Interesting, though, not everybody is celebrating. There are those who actually are trying to use today as an opportunity to project a slightly less pleasant message.
Yes, that's true, Emma. So, for the past couple of years, we've seen these marches take place during the Independence Day celebrations, political marches, both on the left and on the right. And this year is no exception. There will be both extreme or far right, far left marches taking place. But what is exceptional this year is that, of course, all the MPs get invited to the presidential ball. But this year, there's 2 MPs from the far right, True Finns or the Finns party, who say that they will rather join the march outside of the castle than actually going to the ball inside the castle. And this is, this has been the main topic of discussion this week. Both the Prime Minister and the President condemning this behavior.
Let's look at, you're going to Estonia this weekend, aren't you? Are you taking the ferry, or are you taking the 12-minute flight?
No, I'm not taking the 12-minute flight, which I believe, Emma, you have taken.
I have. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. They don't even serve any drinks because, they don't reach that altitude. Anyways, I'm taking the ferry. I'm taking the ferry tomorrow morning, and I'm going with a friend. We're going to check out some restaurants in Tallinn, some new craft breweries. We're quite into artisanal beer. But we're also going to the Super Alko. Alko is the Finnish sort of state monopoly for alcohol, and Estonia is just, one-upped. They call their Super Alko. And, it's everything from wine, champagne, beers, pretty much half price to what they are in Finland.
Super Alko, Petri Burtsoff, that's your new name. Right. One thing that when I was on the aeroplane, the thing that you sometimes get is that you get this glorious feeling of a landscape that you find nowhere else on Earth. And Finland arguably can boast some of the best music ever written to evoke national pride. And anybody, if you've flown into Helsinki airport with a bit of Sibelius blasting in your ears, you know that alchemy of frozen landscapes and the sweeping chords that come with it. Now, one of the country's most cherished modern composers, indeed the great-grandson of Sibelius, has recreated, or has rather created, a brand new soundscape for the country, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. His name is Lauri Porra, and he was commissioned by the Finnish Foreign Ministry to create, as you say, a soundscape for Finland. These are sort of nature sounds and sort of things that Lauri himself finds relaxing or inspirational. And I had a chat with Lauri about this project a while back, and I began by asking him about the inspiration behind the project.
Well, originally the idea on the Finnish soundscape was that since there's a lot of people working and representing Finland overseas, and I've been to a bunch of consulates like in Mexico or London or New York, and there's always some little Finnish design and this and that there. And I was always thinking, wouldn't it be nice if there would be like you could create this sort of little musical landscape that would maybe reflect a little bit this beauty and calmness and serenity that we have here. And I was thinking it would work especially well when people are, usually when people meet on those kind of occasions, it's pretty much a lot of business. You might be talking about difficult subjects and, working out problems or trying to build connections. And then would be nice sort of afterwards to sit down and relax and we could offer like this little, like let's go to Finland for a small moment. whether if you were in, Abu Dhabi or Washington or Tokyo.
Can you tell us just sort of details about the music itself, sort of like who performs the music? Is there, what kind of instruments are involved? Can you give us some teasers about that?
There's various instruments and various different performers. I like to use people who I consider are the best on their instrument. So we have like some typical like classical instrument like cello and some flutes and piano, a little bit of guitar, and then also some traditional Finnish instruments like kantele or the jouhikko. I try to not sort of concentrate on the characters or like this is this instrument, just finding like sounds that I feel evoke the feeling very well. But you could describe it sort of like meditative, somewhat minimalistic. So as is in Finland, I try not to overemphasize like anything. It's more about, tuning in. And when you tune in, you see and perceive less. So then it can be like one or two instruments having a small dialogue and maybe a sound of the wind or something which you cannot really make out of that what's happening. I think for me it's not important what is playing, but what kind of feeling it evokes. And I would rather not have the listener thinking, oh, this is this instrument. It's more about... And also, this is not music that you're supposed to like concentrate on listening. It's music that is supposed to awake something. So in a way, it works best when you don't realize that you're listening music. Instead, you just great mental things happen to you when this is happening.
So, what would be your advice to somebody who wants to listen through the whole soundscape? Like, what would be the ideal way to experience it? Is it lying on your sofa with the nice headphones on, or is it something completely different, like taking your headphones and going to the forest, or what would you recommend?
I give 3 examples which I like. One is with headphones on your sofa, lights off maybe. Another one is taking a walk in the nature or in the city, or in an airplane, but sort of being somehow in movement. And the other thing, which I'm especially thinking in the sort of consulates and this kind of thing, you have your dinner and you have your talks and whatnot, and then you go into the, more calm room, like a cigar room or something, and then you have it on quietly, and you have a nice drink or something, and then you just talk with whoever and have it just on the background, just giving like a nice ideas. It's a song cycle with numerous songs, and the idea is that you can have it infinitely on a loop, and so there's no starting point and there's no ending point, just like nature or life in itself. It just is, and then you drop in and drop out once in a while. So it's more than a dozen different snapshots from around Finland.
Lauri Pora there. Talking to Petri, that idea of creating music that awakes something. We haven't got any music. We haven't got it to play yet because it's only just about to come out today, isn't it? And if you go to finland.fi/soundscape, it should be on the way. But Lauri Pora is a huge figure in Finnish music, isn't he? He doesn't just create soundscapes. He's also quite a hard man.
Yes, that's right, Emma. He's actually he's a guitar player for a really famous. Of course, Finland is famous for its heavy metal band. We all remember Lordi, who won the Eurovision with its hard rock Hallelujah. Lauri is a guitarist for one of the most famous heavy metal bands, and he composes music for movies, TV shows. He's like jack of all trades, I think. And it was great to see him commissioned for this work, which, as you said, was just released. I just checked. It was they put it online this morning. So I haven't had a listen yet, but I think after this show, I'm going to relax and listen to the soundscape.
And he also is very good at National Pride, isn't he? I mean, I think it was 7 years ago on his Independence Day, he did a reworking of Great-Grandpa Sibelius's Finlandia.
Yes, he did, and it's amazing.
It is absolutely amazing. Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Petri. That is all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to our producers, Vincent McAviney, Laura Kramer and Hassan Anderson. Our researcher was Maisie Ringer and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Jack Dewars. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time on Monday. And if you want to listen to that soundscape, just to repeat, it's finland.fi/soundscape. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening and have a great weekend and enjoy the Zurich market.